Production support for this episode of In Focus is provided by Hoosier Energy, providing electricity to Central and Southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Next month, Indiana voters will head to the polls to elect a new governor, a new U.S. senator, several members of Congress, and national, state, and local leaders. Redistricting has changed the look of many races. Many longtime leaders have stepped away from state politics, leaving opportunities for new direction, and increased funding for political advertising is making it easier than ever for messages to reach voters. We'll talk about the candidates and the issues as we put the 2012 general election in focus. Thanks for joining us for this special election edition of In Focus. I'm Sarah Whitmire. You might have tuned in this evening expecting a debate between the candidates for the Indiana's District 60 House seat. We received a verbal commitment from both candidates, but incumbent Peggy Welch's challenger, Peggy Mayfield, did not submit the final written agreement. In the interest of fairness, because Representative Welch did agree to the standard debate terms, we are permitting her the airtime we would have granted her for her opening and closing statements. Peggy Mayfield was notified of this arrangement by certified letter.
Good evening. I'm Peggy Welch, and I have the privilege of serving the citizens of District 60 as their state representative. And District 60 now includes portions of Monroe and Morgan counties. Alicia Keys has a new song out, Girl on Fire. I haven't been referred to as a girl in a very long time, but I am a woman on fire because I am passionate about public service, about doing the right thing for the right reason and the right way. I'm passionate about conducting a campaign that is positive and issues-based, and then being a cooperative, collaborative, and inclusive legislator. I'm on fire to ensure that in this next legislative session, the state surplus of your tax dollars is used wisely for long-term investments in education, infrastructure, and public health. I'm passionate about our schools being adequately funded to provide an environment that helps our students and teachers be successful. I'm passionate about middle-class families being able to afford college while not diminishing the excellence of our colleges and universities, especially our research universities. I'm on fire for the use of all tools and resources to help create jobs, including innovative employment concepts and responsible tax incentives. I'm on fire that the Government Reduction Committee, on which I serve, be used to eliminate unnecessary laws that impede business development. Government transparency should be a passion for all legislators. And as a practicing cancer nurse, I'm passionate about the creation of a health insurance program that expands coverage for approximately 900,000 uninsured Hoosiers, a program that retains and attracts healthcare providers, and a program that provides personal responsibility, but most importantly, improves healthcare outcomes for Hoosiers. And my list of passions could go on and on. But these are not just words and wishes. These are issues that I've worked on throughout my legislative career. And I'm not done. That passion is even stronger because each year I serve, I better understand the needs of our citizens and the process for moving forward with public policy to address those needs. During campaigns, there are only a few issues that are discussed in each legislative session, but there are hundreds of bills and issues about which you will never hear. And that's because those bills are not controversial and they're bipartisan. Voters want the person representing them on all the issues, big and little, to be someone they can trust. Someone who thoughtfully and independently decides the best course of action. I am humbled by the trust that has been put in me by the voters of District 60, and I take very seriously the responsibility that comes with that trust. If you would like to talk with me about these issues that I've mentioned, or my values, or my voting record, or my vision for Indiana, please contact me at peggywelch.com. Thank you to WFIU and WTIU for attempting to host a candidate forum. I am hosting town hall meetings between October 20th and 25th to provide opportunities for citizens to talk about issues. Details are at my website, peggywelch.com. Again, I'm Peggy Welch, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
That was Representative Peggy Welch delivering what would have been her opening statement in the District 60 debate we'd hoped to bring you tonight. We regret we were unable to secure a participation agreement from her challenger, Peggy Mayfield. On to our panel this evening. Joining us tonight is the editor of the Herald-Times, Bob Zaltsberg, reporter for Indiana Public Broadcasting, Brandon Smith, and State Impact Indiana education reporter Kyle Stokes. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight.
Good to
Excited
be here.
about the conversation. Let's begin by discussing the District 60 House race. Now, originally, this district had been redrawn and it had put two incumbents together. Then Ralph Foley decided not to seek another term. So, Bob, let's talk about how redistricting has changed this race in particular.
Well, I think it's changed it a great deal, but I think Peggy Welch is one Democrat that might have a really good shot at winning in what's a really Republican district. I was struck when I watched Peggy Mayfield's television commercial that she focused on her conservative values and focused on her faith and her being a right-to-life candidate, both things that Peggy Welch is also. She also focused on her support for the Second Amendment and even was shooting a gun in her commercial. At the last session, or maybe 2 sessions ago, Peggy actually sponsored a bill to restrict access to handgun permits in the state. And so she's definitely somebody who I think people in the NRA and people who support the Second Amendment are comfortable with. So it just seemed like, you've got Peggy Mayfield, a Republican in that district, but you have Peggy Welch, who's one of the most conservative on several issues, Democrats running in that district too. So if it's going to be an uphill battle, I think, for Peggy Welch to keep her seat, although she is a great campaigner. In 1998, when she first won the seat, it was reminiscent of Richard Murdoch and Richard Lugar, because the Republicans ousted a longtime representative in that race, hoping in a Republican district, and Peggy swooped in and won the race away from the guy that won the primary. So I certainly wouldn't count her out.
And Brandon, you've been covering this one too. Do you see a lot of differences between the two candidates?
Well, no, it goes to what Bob was saying, is that Peggy Welch is one of the more conservative Democrats in the House, and she is also someone in the House Democratic Caucus who plays a significant role, particularly on health care issues. As a cancer nurse, she's looked to, so losing her from the House Democratic Caucus would be a big loss for that party.
And I want to stay on this idea of redistricting for just a minute. Are Democrats poised to lose a lot of seats?
They're poised to lose some seats. It's a question of how many. It seems like the mood around the State House at this point for the House Democrats is, let's not lose enough that the House Republicans get a supermajority, which is 67 seats. It's quorum proof. So even if the Democrats were to say walk out again, it wouldn't matter. The Republicans could still legislate whatever they wanted. That seems to be what Democrats are shooting for. Don't lose so much that we're completely irrelevant. And that's not a foregone conclusion. I think they will have a real shot to have enough seats, but they're certainly not going to get anywhere close to being in the majority again.
Well, Brandon can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Republicans have 60 seats now and the Democrats have 40 seats.
That's right.
So that makes this District 60 race a very important race for the Democrats. So they're going to, they do have, as I said, they do have a really good candidate. But, if the Democrats were to lose that race, that would mean only 6 others that they would need to lose around the state for there to be this supermajority that Brandon was talking about.
And there's another seat between 2 incumbents, a Republican and a Democrat. Bruce Borders going up against, and now, of course, I'm blanking on his name, a Democrat, a fairly solid Democrat in the House Democratic Caucus. And the Democrats not expected to win there either. So you're looking at a pair of seats here just that Democrat incumbents are not expected to pick up again. And so they are going to come real close to losing that quorum, for Republicans getting that quorum-proof majority.
And as an additional point of order, as I understand, I think Scott Reske is running on basically the Republican successor to Scott Reske is running unopposed.
Pretty much unopposed,
and
yeah.
so there's no Democratic challenger in that race. So you're automatically down to 61-39 at that point for the Democrats.
Yeah.
I want to move on to the governor's race here too, though, because we do have so much we want to cover here. Polling has consistently shown Mike Pence ahead, double-digit lead I've seen many times over John Gregg. I want to play a clip from last week's debate where the candidates are talking about right to work.
1 minute. There's no question that unions have made an enormous contribution to the life of our nation. My grandfather, who was an Irish immigrant, was a member of the Bus Drivers Union in Chicago, Illinois for about 40 years. And throughout our history, unions have played a critical role in advancing the well-being and safety of workers, particularly the abuses in the late 19th century of children in the workplace. But I do believe that Hoosiers have the right to work under the terms and conditions of their own choosing. I supported the efforts by the Daniels administration and leaders in the Indiana General Assembly to make Indiana a right-to-work state. First and foremost, because I truly believe in individual freedom and that people ought not to be required to join a union as a condition of their employment. But I also believe that it's going to help create jobs in Indiana. It's already gotten a lot of people talking about Indiana and businesses large and small, and I think right to work is going to be a winner for creating jobs in the Hoosier State for years to come.
Okay, John Gregg, 1 minute.
Thank you. I think organized labor has a very significant role in our society. I think right to work was wrong. I think it's going to lead to lower paying jobs for everybody. And the type of jobs we attract, I don't want poverty level jobs in Indiana. $8, $10, $11 an hour jobs. You can't raise a family on that. It's because of organized labor that we've got the 40-hour work week, that we don't have child labor laws. It's because of organized labor that we've got retirement benefits and safe workplaces and workers' comp and unemployment comp. Organized labor definitely has a place, but it's an easy scapegoat. I've traveled the state and I've talked with steel workers in the north, I've talked with coal miners in the south, and the truth of the matter is they're being discriminated against, and you know, we don't do that. When I'm governor of Indiana, we're going to include all people.
All right, thank you.
Now this race is obviously about a lot more than right to work. I would say jobs, economy, trump all here. Where do the two stand on that issue, Brandon, Bob?
Mike Pence has taken the course that Hoosiers think that Indiana has weathered the economic storm about as well as anybody in the country, and that things look to be on the right path. So he'll bring up Mitch Daniels as often as possible, and that he keeps talking about taking Indiana from good to great, that we don't want to shake things up too much right now, that keep on the course we're on and good things are going to happen. So he talks about that. I think the biggest part of his platform, I think, is that 10% tax cut across the board for everybody. He talks about that a lot as being a focal point of his campaign platform that will spur the economy and be good for all Hoosiers, not just some Hoosiers.
Yeah, and I think he is riding on Mitch Daniels' coattails to a great degree, although he is a much more conservative candidate than Mitch Daniels. And it will be a different kind of governor, I believe, if he is elected, and all indications would indicate that he probably will be elected. But John Gregg is a good candidate. I'm curious about his campaigning. The campaign that started out with all of the down-home advertisements from Sanborn, and I think that worked for a while, but then I started hearing, and this is obviously very anecdotal, I started hearing a lot of people talk about, but what's he really think about the issues? I'm kind of tired of these kind of ads. I want him to seem more gubernatorial. And now he's started to show that a little bit in his ads. But he had a very effective career as a legislator. And he was the Speaker of the House, and the House was tied 50-50. So he was able to get some things done when he was there. But boy, to be to overcome somebody as slick and as sharp as Mike Pence, that's very steep.
And the money too, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, the money isn't close. But one thing that Gregg keeps going back to is that issue of bipartisanship, that he's the only one with a record in Indiana of balancing a budget, creating jobs, and doing all of that in a bipartisan way. He's a conservative Democrat. He'd be the first to tell you, and that's the only way you're going to get elected to a statewide office, it seems, in Indiana anymore, is to be a pretty conservative Democrat. And he is, but he's been hammering Mike Pence for he calls him a show horse, although last night in the debate he called him a one-trick pony for the first time, so that was interesting. But he keeps going back to the fact that Mike Pence didn't pass a lot of bills while he was in Congress, doesn't have a record on job creation, that he's more about social issues than anything else.
Mm-hmm. And Kyle, I know you've spent a lot of time with both candidates talking about education. How are their stances different?
I think it's interesting to look at how the candidates' stances have really gotten reframed. And if you want proof of how big of a race this is in terms of jobs and the economy, you're talking about two candidates that have reframed signature issues as jobs issues and maybe have altered their campaign platforms to accommodate jobs issues. For example, Mike Pence really pushing a vocational education initiative where he wants to breed basically public-private partnerships in communities across the state through these regional works councils that ideally are going to bring in kids to workplaces in local businesses, big employers. Think of what Cummins does in Columbus and try and replicate that across the state, really speaking to how jobs is beginning to trickle into other sectors of the campaign from a policy perspective. And you hear that also with John Gregg last night framing pre-K as an economic development issue and talking about the return on investment. He quotes a figure that $7 for every $7, or I should say for every $1 you pay for pre-K, you get $7 eventually back. I've seen return on investment numbers, frankly, much higher than that as well. It's all reframed in a jobs package. I think between the two, Mike Pence's doesn't necessarily require financial investment up front, but we're not seeing a lot of details from them on the other education issues in this race, and especially the education issues that we've been talking a lot about for the past 4 years and have pushed Indiana out in front of the rest of the pack in terms of their aggressiveness on education policy issues. We haven't heard a lot of talk about that. It's jobs, jobs, jobs.
Well, we haven't talked about the third candidate in the race, and I just want to mention Rupert Boneham and basically ask my colleague Brandon about what effect he thinks that Rupert might have on the race. It seems to me he would take votes away from John Gregg if he's going to take them away.
That's exactly who he's going to take them away from. But I don't see him taking away a ton. In all the polling I've seen, he's polled at or below where libertarians typically poll in this state. Andrew Horning in the Senate race, the Libertarian in Senate race, was polling much higher than John Gregg, which was interesting because, than Rupert Boneham, because Rupert seemed to be more out in the public than Andy Horning has been. But Rupert's going to take a handful of votes here and there, but he's just not got the money or the presence to be able to do any significant impact.
Okay. We got a chat question that I know has not been addressed in any of the debates, so I want to throw it out there. I don't know if any of you will be able to answer it, but it's worth mentioning. The person is asking, when will Indiana blue laws be repealed? The sale of alcohol on Sundays. They're wondering if any of the candidates for governor is taking a stance on this.
I haven't heard any of the candidates for governor take a stance on it. There has been some discussion in the State House about some of that stuff, and I think we might see they're going to try to do a massive overhaul of Indiana's criminal code next session, which is going to be a chore, to put it mildly. Some of that might come along with it, getting rid of some of these old laws that don't seem to make much sense. But nobody in the governor's races really, they haven't gotten down into those kind of details.
Yeah, but it has been a legislative issue before where the grocery stores would like to sell alcohol on Sundays and the liquor stores don't want to sell alcohol on Sundays. So you've got the lobbying forces on those two sides that are sort of at odds.
Absolutely. I do want to invite you to join the conversation. You can send in your questions or comments to news@indianapublicmedia.org or call 1-800-987-8848. You can also submit your questions via Facebook or Twitter. Now, Bob, I want to talk about Gregg's running mate, Vi Simpson here. She's been in the Senate since 1984. House Minority Leader since 2008. What kind of void is that going to leave? How's that going to affect Monroe County and the state?
Well, I think it'll affect both significantly. Mark Stoops is the Democratic candidate. Reed Dallas is a Republican candidate for her seat. The Senate is now 37 Republicans and 13 Democrats. Simpson was the leading Democrat, and so she's going to be taken out of that mix no matter what happens. If Mark Stoops would happen to win, there would they would still hold the seat, but he's not going to have nearly the clout in the Senate that Vi Simpson did. And I think Simpson was able to get some things done in the Senate, even though she was in such a minority, because she'd been there so long. She knows how the game is played. She knows how the process happens, and I think she was able to work some deals and do some things that were effective. Plus, she was a very strong voice for Monroe County.
I think that's the biggest change we'll see in the Senate is, as a voice, she led the Senate Democrats, this small group of people, with a very strong voice. And I don't really think there's anybody in the Senate who can replace that. Tim Lannon looks like the most obvious choice to take her place as Senate Minority Leader, and he'll be a good leader, but I think even Tim would tell you that he's not the kind of voice that Vi Simpson is.
And Brandon, can you touch on just all of the retirements too and how that's going to change the legislature? I mean, just look at Ways and Means, for example.
Yeah, Ways and Means, the House Ways and Means Chairman Jeff Espick is retiring. The Democratic member, the leading Democrat member is retiring, Bill Crawford. Across the board, we're seeing a lot of old-time legislators retire this year, and it's going to make for, quite frankly, a much more freshman kind of legislature. You're just, for instance, I talked about the criminal reform package that they're going to try and push through. The two people in each house, or in each house in the Assembly, Ralph Foley in the House, Richard Bray in the Senate, are both retiring. They've been leading this for a few years now, and they're both going to be gone. So you wonder who's going to take up the mantle in some of these key issues. And it's going to be really interesting when you talk about Ways and Means going into a budget session. Who's going to be the Ways and Means chair in the House? That's a question we still don't know the answer to. Speaker Bosma has said there's plenty of great candidates, but won't commit to saying who it will be.
Let's switch gears and talk about the race for U.S. Senate. Richard Lugar's old seat, really neck and neck here. National folks watching this one. Richard Murdoch, Joe Donnelly. If we can talk about this idea of winning over Lugar Republicans. I've heard this over and over. Brandon, what does that term mean?
Moderate Republicans. It's almost independents, but Republicans who lean that way. And Richard Murdoch hasn't come out and said that he's absolutely going after Lugar Republicans the same way that Joe Donnelly has. Joe Donnelly's made it almost a staple of his platform, is going after those moderate Republicans who weren't happy with the way Richard Murdoch ran his primary campaign against Richard Lugar. A lot of people in the state were really unhappy that Murdoch seemed to slam Lugar repeatedly for not. And then, of course, the letter to fundraisers after the primary victory by Murdoch, in which he said that Lugar betrayed conservatives. A lot of people were still upset about that. And then we had a flyer, and so Richard Lugar hasn't campaigned for Richard Murdoch, said he wouldn't, but in his concession speech said he supported Richard Murdoch and his run. We saw a mailer come out across the state yesterday and today that said Richard Lugar supports Richard Murdoch. And Richard Lugar's spokesman came out and said this was not authorized. He's not making any campaign statements about this, and this shouldn't have been done. And that's just going to hurt Richard Murdoch, who had kind of been trying to put the Lugar backlash behind him.
Well, you know, I'm born and raised in Indiana. I've been here a long time, and it's on these statewide races. It's always sort of a surprise to me when a Democrat has a chance to win. And I think, I mean, there have been exceptions, obviously, like Evan Bayh and a variety of other people. But when you look at Senator Lugar, he was a statesman. He was somebody I'd never expected to see lose, certainly not to a Democrat, and certainly not to a Republican, somebody in his own party. You know, Brandon mentioned Donnelly saying he's going after Lugar, the Lugar Republicans. John Gregg says the same thing. I mean, both of those Democrats see the opportunity to go after these Republicans that are more moderate, a little less conservative, to try to get them into their camp. Because Republicans for a long time, loved Dick Lugar. Obviously, he lost the primary by a wide margin, so something happened there. But those people that did support him, those 40%, 41%, whatever the number was, that did support him, I think that they were not automatics to go into the Richard Murdoch camp, and that's why that race is so close right now.
And plenty of people have pointed out that Hoosiers are not afraid of splitting the ticket. It looks like Mike Pence will win, and probably pretty handily. That doesn't mean that Richard Murdoch is an automatic, that they voted Mitch Daniels in by a landslide 4 years ago, and yet voted Barack Obama, and yet Barack Obama won the state. So they will split the ticket if they really don't like Richard Murdoch.
We've got to get to the state superintendent race here, just because we have Kyle Stokes here, who's an expert on the race, and plus I think it's so interesting. It might not be as close as some of these other races we're talking about, but I think it's interesting because the candidates are so different. I'm struggling to find ways in which they're similar, Kyle.
Diametrically opposed is probably the only way that you can describe what separates the incumbent Republican Tony Bennett and the Democrat challenger Glenda Ritz, Democratic challenger Glenda Ritz. Diametrically opposed on just about every single issue. If you want to pick one, school choice, Tony Bennett is for it and Glenda Ritz is against it. Glenda Ritz says the teacher evaluation mandate that's gone in across the state is a bad thing, and Tony Bennett says it's a good thing and something that he's pushed for. I mean, on and on down the list. I think that those huge changes in education policy, and we really in the past 4 years have seen bigger changes in education policy than this state has seen since the late 1980s. And Tony Bennett, it's probably his biggest campaign advantage is that's what he has going for him. He's not just the fact that he has a lot of money on his side, and he does, and not just because he's been on TV a lot for the campaign, but because he has. It's also because he's been on TV in news stories talking about these big changes. That's the big thing that he has going for him is high name recognition. You need that to win a statewide race. On the other hand, it's also his biggest drawback because it's allowed Glenda Ritz to really mount a very effective grassroots campaign, and I think there are Ritz campaign people who would say they're beating Bennett on the ground in terms of this campaign.
We've got to quickly, just since you mentioned the money, we've got to mention it with the state superintendent's race, because you did a map showing where the money was coming from this race, and to me it was fascinating when you see Mayor Bloomberg, for instance, is giving money to the state superintendent's race. Why do they care about a superintendent's race in Indiana?
Well, there it is. You can see it at stateimpactindiana.com. I mean, what the Bennett people are telling you is that these are people who are interested in what's going on in the big changes in education policy. Now, that may actually be a little bit more pro-Bennett than it may actually be the case. The Ritz people say that Bennett is bought and paid for. Probably what's closer to the middle is that Tony Bennett has tapped into the Republican establishment and is really solidifying his name if he wants to run for future political office, although he says he's staying put. But look at the map, stateimpactindiana.org. It's fun to click through just for a little while.
We have just a few seconds here, but quickly I want to touch on the congressional races. Any of them close?
Well, you know, the 9th District, I'll talk about that a little bit. The 9th District is a different district now. It's much more Republican friendly for Todd Young, but Shelley Yoder won handily in her primary. She's a good candidate. It may be closer than people think.
The only two races that looked sort of close was District 2, which Joe Donnelly was in, and obviously he's not running again. Brendan Mullen is running, the Democrat is running against Jackie Walorski, who ran against Donnelly. That doesn't look like it'll end up being as close, though.
Okay. We regret that we were unable to bring you the District 60 House debate we'd hoped to host tonight. Be assured that tonight's broadcast is just a part of the extensive coverage we're bringing you on air and online at indianapublicmedia.org/election. You can also see a video of this show online at indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. Thanks to our panel for joining us tonight. Certainly a great discussion. And thanks to you for joining us. Have a great night.
Production support for this episode of In Focus is provided by Hoosier Energy, providing electricity to Central and Southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.